Jennifer, it's so nice to have you on the Fempower Health podcast. I had been seeking out an expert to talk about how women's brains age over time. And because at our different life stages, different things happen and we have all these hormone shifts, something must be going on with our brain. So I think you're the perfect person to talk about this because you are studying the science of aging. Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself and how you got into this field?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. And I appreciate you having me. This is going to be fun, I think.
Oh, yes.
So I am a PhD scientist. I have a research lab that I run at the Buck Institute, which is an independent research institute that's wholly devoted to trying to understand mechanisms of aging. And that might sound a little odd to someone who's not really thought about it before. And just to be clear, we're not trying to get people to live to be 800, although there are people on the planet whose goal is in that realm. We think about aging as a risk factor for diseases. So for most chronic diseases, for most diseases of the modern world that are associated with age is actually the number one risk factor. So that means that for something like cardiovascular disease, well, we're all really concerned about what our cholesterol levels are and whether or not we get enough exercise. In fact, your age is a much, much larger risk factor than any of those other things. And so what that means is that for things like cancer and neurodegenerative disease and cardiovascular disease and all of these other things that plague us as we get older, age is the number one risk factor. And so if we can understand the mechanisms that underlie aging, what's causing it, what's driving it, then we can use that knowledge, we can exploit it to target all of those age-related diseases at the same time. And so I find that to be very compelling. As a scientist, I want to work on something that gets me up in the morning, that gets me excited about facing my day. And that was something that really resonated with me.
That is an interesting problem to solve. And I have to ask. So I want to ask you how you got into this, but just because you brought this up and just in case it's on other people's minds, when I hear aging is the number one risk factor, on the one hand, we want to live forever, but it sounds scary. Oh my goodness. And I think logically we know it, but when you say it, it's like, oh my goodness, that's so scary to get older. So I guess I'd love like a quick reaction to that because now I'm like, I don't want to age.
Well, I would also say I would never want to go back to the time before I was 40. I feel
That
like
is true.
I have a wealth of experience and knowledge that I deeply prize. And I can only imagine that gets better with age. So I think there's a lot of good, it's just like anything else. There's good things and bad things about it. I will say that I think we have some ideas about how to age in a more healthy way. And unfortunately, there's no magic bullet. Well, okay, the magic bullets are called diet and exercise. But I think, from my perspective, I was trained as a neuroscientist. So actually as a chemist, a cell biologist, and then a neuroscientist. And so the research that my lab works on is really like an amalgam. It's a mesh of all the things that I know and that I'm interested in. And so I think about everything through the lens of the brain. So it's very important for all of your listeners to understand that I am deeply, deeply biased. So everything I'm going to say is going to come through that lens. And as a neuroscientist, I think the brain is pretty much the master controller for every physiologic system in our bodies. And I've said this before, it's not ruling as a dictator. It's constantly listening to and integrating feedback from the rest of the body. So there's like ongoing dynamic conversation between the brain and every other organ in the body. And it's mediated by chemicals. Would think about them kind of like messengers. And they can carry messages that are kind of like whispered, right, between two cells that are right next to each other. Or they can carry messages that are broadcast, like radio announcements. And all of that different kind of communication is mediated by chemicals or by proteins that are traveling back and forth between your organs.
Right.
And so that's kind of where I landed in this marriage between my background and my training.
Wow, that's awesome. And, look, if you have a bias on the brain being the center of it all, that's okay. Because what I pride myself on, honestly, with Fempower Health is interviewing different experts with different perspectives. And quite honestly, I do believe the brain is kind of the root of it all as well. But it's, again, just always helpful to hear so many perspectives. So we had the pleasure. So normally I don't do prep calls, but we just had like an intro get to know you call first. And it ended up being a short 10-minute call because I think you had to get a grant out, but we hit it off. And I just remember in that conversation, one of the things we discussed is how we all think of the gut brain connection. We hear that so much, right? And here at Fempower Health, I try to focus on women's health more so because it hasn't been studied enough and it's underfunded and we are different than men. Our hormones operate differently, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, you talked about the connection between the ovaries and the brain. So talk to us about that connection.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So I think,
I know it's a big
first
question.
of all, no, I mean, this is what we work on. I think the brain ultimately controls every aspect of physiology, and that extends to female physiology. And we call it reproductive circuits or reproductive function, but maybe we can come back to this point. I think we need different language around those organs because they do more than reproduction. But using the language that we have, all of the neuronal circuits in a woman's brain that control reproduction, that extends from puberty to menstruation to fertility to conception to pregnancy to childbirth to lactation to child rearing. All of that is really about how the brain is connected to those organs. And again, there's this ongoing conversation in both directions. And when you start to think about reproductive function through the lens of the brain, suddenly a lot of things come into focus. So there's lots of different regions in your brain, and they're all talking to each other in different ways. And the part of the brain that houses the neurons that are really important for reproductive function in females is in the hypothalamus. So it's this tiny little structure at the base of your brain that's about the size of a grape in a human. But what's really cool about that area is that it's incredibly neurochemically diverse, meaning that it makes and utilizes hundreds, at least dozens, if not over 100 of these chemical signals or protein signals or lipid signals. So it makes a lot of those words in the chemical conversation that's going back and forth. And the neurons that control reproductive function kind of intermingled with and somewhat overlapping with other circuits that control homeostasis. And when I'm talking about homeostasis in this context, what I'm talking about is organismal homeostasis. So what that really means is the systems that keep your body functioning within a certain range. So things like energy balance, fluid balance, body temperature regulation, circadian rhythms, those are all in the same area of the brain. And so when you start to then think about all of those things I mentioned with respect to reproductive function, suddenly things become a little bit more clear. So, these circuits also play a really important role in regulating things like behavior and mood. And so when you think about the constellation of like physical, but also emotional symptoms that are associated with periods, with motherhood, with menopause, it starts to make sense because the part of the brain that controls these things is also overlapping with those reproductive circuits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes 100% sense. And so, when you talk about the behavior and the mood, is it like I don't know if how does it play a role between the hypothalamus and the hormones? Like, is it a chicken and egg thing? Because I know there's this whole aspect of like right now in the media, there's so much about the workplace supporting women, like if they have severe period pain or through the stages of menopause. I've talked to even HR folks where they're like, well, if it doesn't help the men, we can't support it because everything has to be equal. But I mean, in this case, there's a genuine difference and a genuine impact. There's this interesting acknowledgement that we need to make where we do have these changes happen because of the hormones. And I think a lot of us would prefer it not happen. So, again, how would we, I guess, reconcile that? And how does all that play a role?
Well, let's maybe start with the word hormone. Is that okay with you?
Let's go for it.
The basics. So what do you think hormone means? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
No, I mean, it's a very fair question. And I haven't even ever thought about it that way. I mean, I think of hormone as we have X, Y, Z hormones like estrogen, testosterone, et cetera, and they change throughout our life cycle. So there are the hormones and then the functions that they have. So that's honestly how simplistically I've thought about it. But I'm sure you have a much more holistic and advanced definition.
Well, I mean, sure, I could talk about it for hours, but really it's important to think about what it is we're talking about. So the things you just named, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, those are steroid hormones. And the word steroid just refers to literally one of the building blocks of these chemicals. So they all have the same kind of chemical core, and then they have different pieces that are dangling off of them that make them distinct. But the core is called a steroid. And those are small molecules, and they are hormones. And the word hormone, to me, I think the easiest way to encapsulate what they are is they are the messengers. So they carry messages either between distant regions in the same organ or between different organs in your body. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you could interchangeably use the word messenger with the word hormone. And hormone is a really broad term from a scientific and medical perspective. So it refers to not just steroids, which is one kind of small molecule chemical, but to literally anything that can carry messages inside your body. So that could be proteins, it could be peptides, it could be lipids, it could be gases, it could be small molecules of different kinds. And so hormone is a really like a catch-all term for a messenger.
Mm-hmm.
And the hormones that we think about most are the ones that you named, I think, when we're talking about ovarian function. But what's important to understand is that ovaries are endocrine organs, right? So everyone is super familiar with what they do with respect to fertility, right? We all know the downstream consequences of ovarian aging in that regard. So that can mean things like miscarriages or birth defects and infertility. But on the other side of things, ovaries have lots of functions that have nothing to do with reproduction. So as endocrine organs, they make and secrete a lot of different messengers that are signaling to literally almost every tissue in your body and maintaining your overall health. So they make molecules that signal to your bone, to your brain, to your muscles, to your heart. And when they stop working in the middle of a woman's life, that has profound implications, not just for fertility, but also for overall health. And that's really where my research is focused. But coming back to this idea about hormones, men also have hormones. So men also have these signaling molecules that carry messages between their organ systems. And some of them are shared, but the same molecule can have different functions between individuals, but they can also have really different functions between the sexes. So understanding all of those inter-individual differences and also intersex differences, I think is really important. And we're woefully behind on this, partly because of really insufficient funding. I think partly because of sex bias in research, right? We've been using the male body as biology's baseline for 100 years, partly because of taboos, right? Societal taboos around talking about women's bodies. But the good news is that that's all changing. And in the last 5 to 10 years, and particularly around the question you asked about employers wanting to provide services that are specific for women in the workplace, in midlife, or women around their menstrual cycles, that stuff didn't exist 5+ years ago. So there's taboos are being shattered, and there's a real moment happening right now where things are changing in a good direction. So the message is positive.
It's helpful. It's helpful to hear because I went on one of the many websites that you have because of all the great work you're doing. And just for those wondering about how bad it had been until all these changes now, 1% of biopharma investment goes to female-specific conditions beyond cancer. 20% of basic science research includes female animals. And 10 of the NIH 20 budget went to women's health research. So things are definitely getting better. I know some of this is older data, but not that old. So
yeah, I mean, the biopharma investment has gone up to like just under 4, which is like bananas.
Yeah.
And also ridiculously low.
Yes, I know, right? It's like what, quadrupled, but still only 4%. So it depends
almost
on
quadrupled. Yeah.
So it depends. So, okay. So we're talking about aging. I just wanted to jump into a couple of specific things, just going back to the fun facts. And maybe this is out of order, but it's on my notes and it came to mind. So I just want to bring this up. So there were a couple of fun facts that had me ask some questions based on this whole aging, just to bring to light maybe what all this could mean and create like a specific example. So there's 2 facts. One was that women going through menopause later tend to live longer, as do their male siblings. And then the other is ovaries show signs of aging decades before other tissues.
Yeah.
So let's start with the first one about the menopause, the first thing that came to mind is an interview I did on POI, which is premature ovarian insufficiency. Some have called it primary ovarian insufficiency. And so immediately I thought of these women, and like I probably had it. I had 4 years of infertility, very big struggles. And so if you're POI, you're tending to go through this earlier. So what should women make of that? And what is late menopause versus early? Like, how do we define that timing? Because I think all this is so important. And I have to bring this up. Menopause is now the hot topic in women's health. Thank goodness.
I'll start with that last point. I think that is so exciting to me. And when we started 3.5-4 years ago, when people would ask me what I wanted, like if everything went the way I wanted it to go, what would be my dream scenario? It was that I wanted this to be a conversation around every dinner table. I wanted it to be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. I wanted it to be something that was normalized and also recognized as important, not just for women and not just for young women or older women, but literally important for everybody on the planet. And I think we're kind of getting there. Which is like... It's amazing. All right. So backing into your other questions, well, there's a lot to unpack there. I think let's start with age at menopause. So what you're really talking about is what we call reproductive span. And again, I really think we need new language around this because we're talking about more than reproduction. But what we're talking about is the age of menopause and how that relates to overall lifespan, right? So you have reproductive span and then you have lifespan. And there are several studies that have shown a correlation between age at menopause, age at natural menopause, I should say, which is distinct from what you were talking about with POI or POF. So age at natural menopause is correlated with overall lifespan. Now, that doesn't mean that if you go through menopause early, that you're destined to die early. It's a correlation. It's a population average, but it does mean that there's some, well, and what you said is also true. Age at menopause also carries through, that correlation with lifespan carries through to male siblings. So that means that there's a genetic component to all of this that's important for both men and women. So understanding why ovaries are aging prematurely, and they really are, is important for everyone. And so, yeah, you mentioned that ovaries are one of the first organs in the body to age. And in fact, if you think about it from the perspective, just generally functioning healthy women, somewhere in late 20s, early 30s, ovaries start to show overt signs of aging, meaning that they're already considered geriatric by the medical community. And doctors have moved away from using that term, thank God. But it's kind of profound to imagine that when your body is functioning somewhere near peak performance, that your ovaries have already started to age. And you can try to put a clock on it. If we characterize function, then ovaries are aging at about 2.5 times the rate of the rest of the tissue in my body, which is crazy. So from a purely scientific perspective, ovaries are fascinating because they are a model for accelerated human aging. We should study them the same way that we study other accelerated models of human aging. But we don't know why. So that's the important thing to drive home here. We do not understand what is the driving factor or what is the cause of ovarian aging. And if we could understand that, then we could find interventions to delay it. And again, I just want to make very clear that I'm not talking about making women have babies when they're 70. It takes a lot more than functioning ovaries to have a healthy offspring. But what I am talking about is preserving that endocrine function. So preserving some of those hormones, those messengers that are so important for general health. I think on the non-reproductive side of things, a lot of women don't realize that menopause dramatically increases risk of heart disease, stroke, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, cognitive decline, autoimmune disease, arthritis. There's just a whole load of things that overnight your risk goes up when your ovaries stop working. Yeah. So from my perspective, I think it's really important to understand what those driving factors are behind ovarian aging. Now, I feel like I missed a piece of your question. So
no, because I had a part two. Okay. Well, I guess for women with POI, just a point of clarification. And again, I don't want to belabor it because I can get detail oriented. So Tasha, if you want to edit this out, that's okay. I know that if women have hysterectomies, that's a medically induced menopause. But if someone has POI, that's not a medically induced, but it's how their bodies work. mean that they are like very, very early menopause.
Yeah, and POI can be caused by all kinds of things, including things like chemotherapy, right? That really dramatically impacts a woman's ovarian function. And for the most part, POI or POF, however you refer to it, can be unexplained, right? We don't necessarily understand what the underlying causes are. What we see are the downstream consequences. And yes, it is akin to an early menopause. And what's was fascinating when I first started working in this space, because I sort of backed into reproductive aging. I'm interested in the conversation between brain and lots of different organs, but we came to the ovaries. And once I started learning about them and realizing how little was known, like there's nothing that could keep me from trying to understand this. But when you think about POI and POF, the medical community treats that as a catastrophe, right? I mean, there are a woman who is in her 20s who suddenly has her ovaries stop working and it starts to experience things like osteoporosis and heart disease. The medical community treats that like a catastrophe and absolutely puts her on hormones, replacement therapy, if that's an option, and does all kinds of other things to try to mitigate those health impacts. Whereas if it happens 20 years later, we don't do anything really. This is a natural part of life and just roll with it. It's such a strange thing because it's literally the same set of symptoms.
I never thought about it.
The only difference is the age of the patient. So that for me was kind of a wake up call when I was first starting to learn about this stuff. And it's maybe something important to keep in the back of your mind when you're thinking about whether or not this is something worth pursuing.
Interesting. So here's a question for you because, and I think you'd be a great person to ask this question, is our bodies are made to have children, right? There's the philosophical side of, should women bear children? And I think it's a power of choice, right? I just did a very cool episode on a woman who chose not to have children, and she wrote a great book, and it was such a fascinating conversation. So aside from people making choice and people's opinions about women who have or don't have children, is there research on the impact of this healthy aging based on whether you have children, how many children you have, and when you have children? And also if it's an IVF baby or not, which I think it's too early to look at that research. Because I think of my family. So my grandmother, she had 15 kids.
Did her uterus fall out?
No, but one of them died, I think, early on, and the 14 survived. And my dad was the second eldest. And I just have to say, she escaped Hungary in the 70s when she was 50 years old. So she lived till literally half her life in Hungary and half in freedom in the United States. And so she just died in May. Wow. And then I think of me, who thought that I would have tons and tons I got married at 35 and started to try right away and had a proactive doctor, learned right away I was going to have fertility issues. I now wonder how my path would have changed had that not happened. Because I think that created stress. But nonetheless, it took 4 years and I had my son at 41. So you have literally two completely separate cases where my grandmother's last child was probably born in her early 40s. My first and only child came at the age of 40. And I'm so curious, like, what does all that mean? And again, I know there's nuances with genetics, et cetera, but I'm just so curious if there's ever been data around this whole impact of having children not when you have them, if it's an IVF baby. Like, what do we know so far about that whole combination?
Yeah, those are really fascinating questions. And many of the answers that I give to questions like that are the same, which is we don't know. We know some things, lots of things we don't know. Simple things like you would think that we should know the answers to every single one of those questions. The reason that we don't is because we literally have not collected the data for all of the reasons that we've already touched on. This is part of what we're trying to fuel discovery around. In terms of IVF, so we really don't have good data there. And not because it doesn't exist. The IVF industry is deeply concerned with keeping themselves in business. And so a lot of the research money that has gone into the IVF fields is really focused around making IVF better. I'm not aware of any data set that has followed longitudinally those early IVF children in a way that would give us comprehensive data sets that would tell us the answer to those questions. I hope and I think that data is now being collected. So stay tuned. And, to be honest, I think whatever the answer is, IVF has been, a godsend for a lot of people. And I think many women wouldn't have biological children without it. So as much as I'm not a fan of the IVF industry. I think that, it's kind of amazing that we have it, but it is a Band-Aid, right?
I know. Trust
Like
me. After doing, this is why I started the podcast, because I got into the details of women's health through my own journey and learning about my body.
It does.
And
Everyone does.
I know, right? And
Yeah.
and so as I did I will never forget how I switched from focusing on fertility to broadening to women's health. There was a post on Reddit, and there was a woman who was in her early 40s. She had 2 embryos left, and she posted, "Should I use both or one? I constantly have miscarriages." I wrote to her and I said, "You are asking the wrong question. You need to know why you're having miscarriages and then make decisions, not how many embryos to use." And that was when I realized we're all focused on making embryos and putting them in our body. But how often are we asking why? And then as I started digging, I'm like, we don't know anything about anything.
Anything. It's ridiculous. And this is, I should say, that we're not talking about things that are so difficult to understand. We literally just haven't done the research. It is happening now. I mean, that's part of the reason that we started the consortium, which we can talk about later or not at all. But I put the word equality into the name of this nonprofit because I think that it truly is an issue of equality. I think that the fact that women go through this reproductive decline in midlife, whether or not they want to have biological children, I personally don't have children, but that was a choice. And yet, from the moment I went through puberty, essentially, but at every moment in my adult life, I have had to think about in the back of my mind this ticking biological clock when I was thinking about my career, when I was thinking about my education. And as I start to approach perimenopause and menopause, these things are going to have an impact on my daily ability to function in my job and in my life. And men simply don't have that. And so understanding what those driving factors are that underlie ovarian aging, and then looking for ways to mitigate those health consequences and those things that happen that are related to the endocrine functioning organ. I think this is something that is like just so important.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Come back. I didn't actually get to all of your question. Can you steer me back?
Well, there was one where I had asked about, you had talked already about the ovary showing signs of aging decades before other tissues. But when I read that as one of the facts, my immediate reaction was how, could trauma also impact ovarian aging? Do we know that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that impacts aging in the rest of your body can also impact aging in your ovaries. So certainly any kind of stress, right? Chronic stress in particular is not great for healthy aging. And that's true for ovarian function as well. The converse of that, which is heartening, is that things that we know that might impact aging in the rest of the body also seem to impact ovarian aging. So that's good in 2 directions, meaning that if we can understand why ovaries are aging prematurely, then those interventions are likely to have an impact on the rest of the body. And those mechanisms that we discover will also potentially be important for aging the rest of the body. So again, there's a reason to look beyond male, female, and to just think about them as an amazing system that nature has given us to try to understand accelerated aging. There was something else you asked, though, that I really wanted to come back to. And maybe I can't remember what it was, though.
It might be one of those where we don't think about it and it'll come back to you. So when it does, just let me know and we'll get back to it. So one question I also wanted to ask is the HPA axis. Mm-hmm. So is that simply the discussion we had about the hypothalamus, or is there more to it that we need to discuss? Because I know some folks have asked me, can you please cover this topic? And so...
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yes.
So I will say that, HPA or HPG, that you can use those kind of interchangeably the same way that you were saying POI or POF, refers to the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, or gonadal axis. So that's really like brain. So hypothalamus talking to pituitary, which is an endocrine organ, talking to your gonads, which means your ovaries and your uterus in women. And that is really like the classic circuit, and it goes in both directions. Classic hormonal circuit that controls things like your ovulatory cycle, your menstrual cycle, pregnancy, things like that. So that That axis is obviously clearly important, no question about it. But I would say for the last 40, 50 years, all of the research that's gone into the central brain control of reproductive function has hyper-focused on the HPG axis, kind of to the detriment of understanding other things. And so I think we know a lot about that pathway, but there's a lot of other potentially important pathways of communication that we don't understand, that we haven't even yet discovered. So if you think about the kind of conversation that I was talking about between brain and reproductive organs being mediated by chemicals, the chemicals are the words in that conversation, then there are words that we haven't yet discovered. So the ovary is probably making lots of things that we don't even know about yet. That's part of where my lab is focused. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Okay. No, I'm glad I asked the question because, this is actually a perfect interview to ask it, because it now makes sense that there's been so much, because you're right. I read about it all the time. And this is the first time that we're talking about the connection between the ovaries specifically and the brain. And I think this type of specific conversation is so important because it clearly isn't happening enough. So thank you for that. So we age. It's a normal part of life. And what struck me also is when we were talking about POI or POF, about how doctors can do things to mitigate the potential impacts. And when we are in our 40s, 50s and hit menopause at the more typical average time, maybe that focus isn't there, but nonetheless, there's still potential changes to our body that are going to be to different degrees in every woman. So, I know this is we want to optimize and better understand aging to help with a lot of these potential diseases rather than allowing us to live to be 800. So what are some of the realistic things that people should be looking at now so I guess what are these factors based on today that we can do so that people aren't afraid of, oh my goodness, I'm aging and all these things are going to happen to me?
Well, like I said at the beginning, everyone wants a magic bullet, but the magic bullet so far, and we just keep getting this message over and over and over again through lots of studies around aging in humans, is that what you put into your body and how you use your body are probably the most impactful things that you can pay attention to. So what you eat and how much and what kind of exercise you get. Those are the things that are within your control right now. And those are the things that can clearly have a benefit both to aging in your whole body, but also aging in your ovaries. If you're in perimenopause or approaching menopause, there's a conversation to have with your doctor around whether hormone replacement therapy might be something that you want to consider. And this is a place where it's super important to acknowledge that, number one, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not giving advice, but also to acknowledge that this is female reproductive physiology, but female physiology in general is one of the most complex signatures in all of human health. And so we need to treat it that way. And it's incredibly variable at the level of an individual. So your cycles and my cycles are completely different. Whether or not I can take HRT or you can take HRT, also completely different. Dependence on environment, dependence on genetic predispositions, dependence on a lot of things. And again, that's where it's important to have a conversation with your physician. But thinking about that variability means that you want to pay attention to what's right for you. And hormone replacement therapy is another Band-Aid. So much like IVF, it's imperfect. It has been maligned because of a study that came out a long time ago that was wrong. That actually, it wasn't even that it was wrong. It was that there was a lot of misinformation spread through the media about it. And that misinformation persists to today.
Yep.
And, we can go down that rabbit hole if you want to. I'm happy to talk about it. But maybe the important take-home message is that we don't know all those words. We don't know the full lexicon in that conversation between brain and ovaries, but we do know some of them, right? The HPG axis was established around them. That is estrogen, progesterone, things like inhibin, FSH, AMH, these things that we know about that are part of that axis, you can certainly measure. And some of them you can try to put back, right? You can try to replace a few of the things that ovaries make that are important for general health, and estrogen is a big one. Now, having said that, I think lots of women try HRT and then stop, because it's kind of applied like a sledgehammer with like a one-size-fits-all approach. And it's one of those places where personalized thinking about like how it's delivered, what's in it, how much of each thing is in it. That needs to be personalized for every person. And there's also a sweet spot of timing when you start it. So there's real clear data that if you start it too late after menopause, then it can have a detrimental effect. So again, it's really important to have a conversation with your doctor. But there's no question, there's overwhelming data in tens of thousands of women who are able to take HRT that it has a dramatic positive impact on all of those things we talked about in terms of cardiovascular health, in terms of reducing osteoporosis risk, et cetera, et cetera.
No, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
when you were saying about how it's so individualized, I can't emphasize this enough, is because it is so complex, we as women really need to take ownership around monitoring what's happening to our body. And I think what's hard is we don't know what we don't know. Like I think back to like early in life, right? When you have period pain, like how much of it is normal and you know your own body. And so that's normal. And like how much is heavy bleeding? And now it goes into menopause. I see so many of my friends will complain about, oh, I'm having so much anxiety. Oh my goodness, now I'm drinking red wine and I get a migraine. But none of them are putting it together that that's what it is until we all start talking to each other and realize everyone in our age group is dealing with this. Oh my goodness, it must be a stage of life type of thing.
Right. And just remembered some of what you asked me that was
go for it.
Interesting to touch on. Coming back to this idea about how dependent it is on the individual. The age at natural menopause is considered normal if it's between the ages of 40 and 54. So it spans like normal spans of 14-year window, which is crazy if you think about it. I mean, I think of puberty as being something that's kind of like a big window, but that's like 3 to 5 years. 14 years is considered normal. And so understanding that intra-individual variability just by itself would give us a lot of clues about what the underlying causes of ovarian aging are. The other question you asked that is really fascinating, but for which I think the jury's still out in a lot of ways, is the relationship between whether a woman has children or not, and if she has children, how many children she has, and her overall lifespan. There's a correlation between the age at which a woman has her last child, if she has children, and lifespan, but that is really just kind of, I think about it as like a proxy for reproductive span, right? If you have a child, you're probably still reproductively active. And so it's kind of like a proxy for age at menopause. But there's a lot of research going on right now to ask these sorts of questions. And it's fascinating.
It really is. So going back, I thought about this. So again, my original ask was, I'd like to find an expert to talk about how our brain ages over time. So to close the loop, that's not the right question, is it? Right? That was the wrong question because it's the brain ovary connection. And is it really the ovaries? Like it's a chicken and egg. Like I think it's both.
I think it's both too. I mean, obviously that's why I'm working on this. I think we have to understand both. And I think we have to understand how that conversation changes with age. We don't know a lot about that. We know, again, like the big 4 or 5 that we always talk about. But even that, I would say there's a lot of limitations around how we measure these things, around the data sets that exist. Like we don't have huge, large scale data sets that really look at a granular level, at a detailed temporal level, how these things change in large numbers of women. And that research is just getting started, a lot of it. But again, it's a positive message.
Well, it's good to know that more and more people are focusing on the research and that there are solutions now. So women, we don't have to worry, oh my goodness, I'm aging. This is horrible. There are lots of things that can be done. It's about having a proactive mindset. And also one other thing I just have to mention, because I get so many messages about this.
Okay.
Please go to NOMS, which is the North American Menopause Society, and find an OBGYN through that because they are certified in menopause. And there's also a lot of startups that are focusing in this space. So you can research those. But if anyone is frustrated and you're in that stage of life, please check out these amazing resources because they can help you find the care if your clinician is not particularly trained in this particular stage of life. So I just had to give that plug.
Can I add one more?
Please.
I would add one more to that, and that's the National Menopause Foundation, so NMF. And I'm on their clinical advisory board. I think that they're doing amazing work. They only started a few years ago, but it is the first nonprofit that's only focused on the patient. So NAMS is a professional organization that's basically made by physicians. So they definitely have a lot of great information on their website, and you can find a doctor there. But the National Menopause Foundation is just there for patients. intelligence. So they have kind of a cool portal where women can talk to each other and get like peer support, but they also have a podcast and a lot of information. And they also have information about physicians and things like that. But yeah,
awesome.
knowledge is really important. And paying attention to where you're getting that knowledge from is also important.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I guess, what is your hope for the future? I know it's like, let's figure out all this data, but if you were to succinctly summarize what your hope is.
My hope
if that's possible.
I'll tell you, this is my goal. We want to understand what's driving ovarian aging so that we can sync up aging in ovaries with aging in the rest of a woman's body. That's it. That's what we want to do. And so what we fund dictates what we know. And so right now I'm hyper focused on increasing funding in this space. And part of that is through the GCRLE that we started, which gives away grants to scientists and is really engaging an army of people to work on this. And that said, part of what we do is we're trying to build out the ecosystem around that research space so that we can accelerate translating those basic science discoveries from the lab into women's hands faster. And a big part of that is you and the people listening. So we want to have ambassadors who spread the word about what we're doing and really who just help us put forward information so that women who have questions actually know where to get answers from.
Awesome. Well, I will add them to the website if I haven't already. I may have, because I now changed the website where you can find either your life stage or a given topic. And all the episodes I've done, the research that I've done, it's all like organized now so people can find it, because otherwise you're just getting the latest episode in your feed and may not find what you need. So I will make sure that they're there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will also add in the show notes all the ways to be able to connect with you. So I'll make sure. I align with you and the wonderful Allison, who has been working so hard behind the scenes. I just really appreciate her so much. And so I'll just make sure we connect. So everyone check out the show notes for more details. And thank you so much, Jennifer, for your commitment and for making time. This was really fun. I feel like we need to do a part 2 and a part 3 over time as more research comes about.
I would be delighted to do that. And thank you for a really fun conversation.
Well, thank you.